Hi guys, Tech here, and I'm gonna do something just a little different this time. Just a little bit different. Where we're gonna do 3 build guides, kind of back to back to back. They're all going to be tricksters, and I'll have all 3 of them out before the new league starts. The reason why I'm doing 3 build guides specifically and only 1 ascendancy is because the Trickster Ascendancy's got some spice to it. So before we go into the build guide itself, let's go over the Trickster Ascendancy changes, what is drawing me to it, and then that'll help kind of go over the build stuff as well. So 1 step ahead is absolutely phenomenal. It gives us increased action speed, it caps monsters' action speed, both of which are huge changes and huge quality of life improvements, because in the current game they do so much to try to slow you down, and it's just annoying, and 1 step ahead essentially negates most of that by itself. So that's a very, very big node. Basically anything that you wanted to play on the top or the right hand side of the tree as Jug, but it didn't make sense to path all the way over to do, now makes sense to do now that we have access to the new Trickster Ascendancy. The other part that is huge for defensive purposes, just kind of like Jug, is you have Escape Artist and Spellbreaker. So what Spellbreaker does for you is Spellbreaker gives you spell suppression, extra spell suppression, and then energy shield recovery start when you suppress spell damage. The reason the start is so important here is it's going to give you a huge quality of life where you can basically play an Evasion ES, either a hybrid character with life or a straight up CI character with some evasion, and basically use that constant start instead of having to rely on something like Vol Discipline. This should happen way more often than Vol Discipline would. Then it also has the very powerful Soul Drinker, which is very similar to the way Slayer Leech works, except for on Energy Shield. And we also have something that's super cool in Polymath, which gives us a lot of different damage as long as we use a bunch of different masteries, which Blade Vortex is a very cool skill, as it can use a lot of masteries that really benefit it and can really pump up those Polymath numbers. So that's kind of what we're going to go into today. So let's get started with me just kind of showing you how it looks on the Blade Vortex setup. This is unoptimized gear. This is for display purposes, basically, so you can kind of see how it works in a not ideal setup and kind of see if this is something that may tickle your fancy and maybe something that you're interested in doing. This version is going to have more of a poison theme. However, if you wanted to do it pure Phys, or if you wanted to do pure cold convert, you can absolutely do this. You would just need to tweak a couple of things on the tree, but other than that, it's pretty straightforward. The reason I went with poison is just because poison is very easy to do. It requires basically no gear investment and is pretty strong. The others are going to be much higher on the gear investment side, which is why I didn't go over those. So this is more of just a solid league starter that'll get you up and running to where either you can transition into a separate build, or if you like the way it plays, you can kind of keep going. And so to kind of go over that portion of it, now one thing I will kind of caveat on is Herald of Agony isn't the fastest of startup. So it takes a little bit of juice to get going, but once it gets going, it is absolutely amazing. You'll notice that I'm basically putting temp chains on everything, and on a couple of things there's Enfeeble. Again, that's just because the gear optimization is not great. I would most likely have rings that would apply those for me, or I would have a for one and a ring for the others, something along those lines. There are some uniques you can utilize that'll do that. The other interesting thing is, if you still want to go poison, you can now use the cold to poison ring and freeze things and poison them, which sounds like a lot of fun, And while I didn't previously consider going all in on something like that, this could possibly be the lead to do it, now that Rim Sorrows now have 100% conversion, so it makes a lot more sense than it did previously. Let's go ahead and get into the path of building. Now, this is going to be where a lot of changes are going to happen, so I'm going to kind of walk through the changes real quick and then we'll dive into it. So down here, you're going to notice there's a bunch of leveling trees. The top 5 are for Blade Vortex itself. The next ones are for if you tried leveling as Blade Vortex and it is not working out for you. So if you tried BV, it's not that you hate Chaos, but you don't like the BV playstyle. Now, one thing I will kind of forewarn you with Blade Vortex is until you get exceptional performance and potency of will, it doesn't feel that great, and until you get Unleash. So it is kind of a drag to get to that point. Now, once you get to that point, which is at the end of Act 4, if you're still not feeling it, you can very easily transition into the Soulrend leveling. You'll have to unspec 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like 10 points. So it's not the end of the world. You might not be able to unspec all of it at once. However, here's the beautiful thing about Soulrend. Having that increased duration doesn't actually hurt the build at all, so you don't even have to unspec out of it immediately. It's just eventually you'll probably want to transition over because there's more effective nodes. Another thing I do want to note is over here, you're going to see that there's one dexterity node that I didn't take to save points. Now, when you're leveling, I would probably take this guy to go over through here. Now, if you are planning on this being your in-game tree, you can just actually just take off those 2 points and save yourself 2 points right there. However, the reason that this is set up as a leveling tree is normally I would recommend transitioning from a hybrid life to where I wouldn't recommend doing that necessarily for Blade Vortex. I feel like Soulrend, because you're getting much further on this side of the tree than you are with Blade Vortex, it just makes a lot more sense to go more into CI because you get things like a natural calm, and that's why you're going to see such a stark difference in the in-game trees versus the leveling trees. Lightning's kind of the same way. So Lightning, I have it as life-based for leveling purposes. Again, at the very beginning, you may want to just path right through these two before you go up here and go into any of this stuff. Just path through these, get this life node, then start working your way up. That is 100% up to you, but I did want to just lead that out there if you are one of those people that prefer playing lifestyle builds instead of CI or low lifestyle of builds. And then we go to the in-game. Again, kind of same song and dance here. You may not need these nodes. I got them anyway, just to make sure that you have your spell suppression cap. But if you have your spell suppression cap, you don't need any of this, so keep that in mind as well. And with the changes to gearing and with shield breaker, you should be pretty solid with getting to spell suppression cap. It shouldn't be a big deal where you had to get a whole bunch of tree nodes or anything like that. Now, going back over to Blade Vortex, you'll notice that for the first lab, we want to get one step ahead. For the second lab, we want to get Escape Artist. And the only reason we're getting Escape Artist is for Spellbreaker, which is fantastic. So you kind of want to get these three in that order. The reason why is one step ahead, again, is a huge quality of life increase, and Spellbreaker is a huge defense increase. You don't really need the offensive side of things until you get to the very late stages of the game, or if you're struggling with DPS. If you're struggling with DPS, I would still probably recommend starting with Spellbreaker, just because you're going to be able to survive long enough to do more damage than if you go Polymath first, and you're going to probably want to wait towards till the end to start really hitting all those masteries on the tree, so you won't have as many of those early on. And then you can see, like, once we get to the end, you just got masteries all over the place. It's one of the cool things about Blade Vortex. It's very easy to get a whole bunch of masteries, and they're all impactful and they all help your character out. The other thing is you don't have to get this curse set up. The only way you want to get the curse set up is if you already have a way of applying multiple curses without being socket starved into it. So if you can already apply Temp Chains or Assassin's Mark, Enfeeble, or Despair, if you can already apply 2 of those, I would get Whispers of Doom. The other thing that's cool about getting Whispers of Doom is you get extra poison chance, which is fantastic. If you don't go that route, it's perfectly fine. You're just going to lose out on a little bit of poison chance. Not that big of a deal. The other thing is if you're wanting just poison chance, you can always come down here to Fatal Toxins, which will give you back some more poison chance as well as some poison damage itself. However, it doesn't get you an extra mastery, so your polymath does go down just a little bit going that route. Now, the skills section and the notes section are a little bit different than what I normally do. So you'll notice there's one that's called Curse Option that's using Bane with Spell Cascade to put Enfeeble and Temp Chains on monsters. You can use this. I would not recommend it past leveling for far, right? Like early mapping, it's fine to use something like Bane. Once you get later into mapping, especially if you're going to do Obliteration Wands, you really want this stuff to be on hit. It's just going to give you way better quality of life. Now there is the Plague Bearer and Withering Step setup. I would recommend putting both of these on life tap while leveling. Then if you are not having any mana issues later on, you can always swap it to increased duration if you feel like it. However, it works just fine on just life tap, which is fine. Now on the aura defenses, so you'll notice I'm basically going to have Discipline and Grace on here. I would recommend using these first. Then I would go into whatever Herald makes sense for you. So if you're playing the cold version, Herald of Ice. If you're playing the pure Phys version, go Herald of Purity. And if you're playing the poison version, go Herald of Agony. Herald of Agony or Herald of Ice are both solid leveling options, so that doesn't matter so much. It's more of what you're wanting to do with the build long term. I did kind of keep this fairly generic, even though I did go into the poison right here. That's kind of it, right? It's just this poison node and this poison here. So if you don't want to go poison, that's fine. You just take off this poison gem. You're no longer on poison, and put in either Brutality if you're going pure Phys, or if you're going to go cold, you may want to change that into something that makes a little bit more sense for your build. Now you can also always just put in Inspiration here. You can also, instead of running Cruelty, run Life Tap. If you need that mana while you're leveling up, that's perfectly fine. Just throw Life Tap in here instead of Cruelty. You can go into Cruelty once your mana situation is fixed. At level 2, you're going to want to go into Freezing Pulse with Volley, and then if you have the extra slot and you have the gem, you can always plug Onslaught in there. It will give you a little bit more cast speed, a little bit better quality of life, but it is in no way, shape, or form required. These kind of go in order of importance. So the reason this is second is because of quality of life. Increased critical damage, increased critical strikes get better as you level, so they become more important compared to where they're going to be down here. So for this one, Frost Bomb with Spell Cascade and with a low level Arcane Surge if you can fit it and you have the gem. If you don't, just get Frost Bomb and Spell Cascade, it's fine. Blade Vortex. So increased critical strikes is very, very good early on because it's a lot of crit chance. So when you get any of those crit nodes, you get a really high amount of scaling off of it. Added cold damage is also very good while leveling, so you can start freezing and shattering stuff and get that good feeling. Also, if you have Rim Sorrow gloves, this just gives you more DPS. Just flat out more DPS. Now, you'll notice that there's several gem slots available from here. That's because I didn't want to get too technical with it, because it's really like whatever movement skill you feel like using. I would use a movement skill in addition to Withering Step, but that's just me. You can always use like Whirling Blades and throw on Fortify with it. You can use a Wither Totem setup. Any of those things are good, but it's really your choice of whatever you would prefer to use. when we go into the itemization, there is a leveling version, which is just all blues, nothing special, just mid-roll blues of specific mods, just so you kind of know what to look for while leveling. And then there is some recommended uniques. These are not best in slot, they're just very good normally for their cost. Now, with that being said, there's a new caveat with uniques. We don't know how rare they're going to be. We also don't know how expensive some of this stuff is going to be. So use your own decision making here. If a cold iron point is 10x and a +2 dagger with some crit on it is 1x, buy the 1x version, right? You use your head here. You don't have to stack the levels as high as humanly possible, even though it is nice and it does give you a lot of damage. These are not best in slot, they're just normally very good for their cost. Same thing with Syntrek boots. Normally it's very good for its cost. It's not necessarily the best, it's not necessarily the worst. It also does have some raw stats on it, which is nice. The rest of most of this stuff is life in res with maybe some spell suppression thrown in here. I think the amulet is really good. Yeah, the amulet is really good. So just kind of keep that in mind. You might not be able to get all of this on an amulet. And that's okay if you don't. Again, these are just the roles you're looking for. You don't have to get these exact things. It's just kind of a roadmap of what would be good stuff to go into. You can also use Obliteration Wands if you do decide to go the Obliteration Wand path, which will give you way better clear speed because it causes chaos explosions. You have to have two things going for you. You're going to have to weapon swap probably with really tanky rares as well as with some bosses. With that being said, I would not recommend that if you're a very new player to the game. If you're a very new player to the game, I would go with a more traditional setup and then lead the weapon swapping more for more intermediate people, or if you happen to drop them, just throw them in your empty slot and try it out. If it doesn't work, but I wouldn't go out of your way and try to go down that path if you don't have to. Gentle gloves are also a really, really solid glove choice. However, they don't have a lot of stats and they don't have any ES on them. However, the explosions are really nice and it does not require Obliteration Wand. It does give you temp chains on hit, which is really cool, but these are normally fairly expensive, so kind of keep that in mind. I do have some general notes here. If you're having any issues with dex or strength, kind of read this part up here. Basically tells you to pick up the 30 nodes if you need to. You'll also notice I'm guessing the meta with Trickster. I want to be very, very clear about that. This is me guessing the meta. So there's a reason why I have multiple trees on here, is in case I guess wrong, I want you to have a fallback plan. I don't want you to be stuck in a rut and have to re-level a completely different character. So if this turns out to not feel good for you, or if it turns out to be really bad at endgame for some weird reason, then you got fallback plans built into this. And that's why I want to do it this way. However, if you do go into one of those fallback plans, I'll link once all the videos are uploaded to each individual one from the other ones. So no matter which one you go to, you can always find the successor. If you decide, like, let's say you start leveling as Blade Vortex, decide you don't like it, you're going to try Lightning. You start trying Lightning and it feels really good, so you decide to flip over to Lightning. That's perfectly fine. Just go watch the Lightning video and download that Path of Building and that Better Trading. That way you have a really, really good experience, because that's what it's all about. Have some general advice stuff. Here's where I go into the gloves. Rings or corrupted gloves for the curses as well. Also talking about being smart about your decision making. If stuff's really expensive, don't buy it, just craft it. We all have our access to harvest now. If you're not sure on how to harvest craft something, there's a wonderful website which is Craft of Exile, and you can just click on whatever base type of item you have, then click click on the harvest craft and you can theory craft your own thing before using any harvest stuff, which is really, really cool. Lets you see kind of the rarity of stuff. It will even calculate, if you put all the mods in, how many times you're going to have to replicate the process to get what you want. The other thing is there is a better trading API. Now, to see better trading, I actually don't have that pulled up right now, but that's okay. I can get it up in just a second. So, oh no, down for maintenance. You can kind of see what time I'm recording this. So when you are on the trade API, there will be a little chaos thing over here. Underneath it, it will have an option to import folder. Click on import folder, and you're gonna paste this super long code right here where it says code for better trading API. It's really, really long. It's gonna go over several screens. It's really, really long. So you copy this whole thing, just hit Control C, and then go to download the API if you don't already have it. If you already have it, you're good to go. Just go to the Path of Exile trade site, the official one, and then click on import folder and then copy that link below. And then it will have different things that you can adjust. It will have a one-hander. Now you can adjust that to whatever type you want to use. It will also have blank, it'll have any, and then it'll say what it is, gear. Now what that means is that can be used for amulets, armor, rings, belts, anything. That's why it says any. Now once you click on there's a show filter option on the Path of Exile trade website. Just click on that show filters, and then you can, on the left hand side, you can change the item category and just pick whatever category you want, and that will give you access to whatever you need to fill in. I also talk about Obliteration Wands down here. It is much better clear speed, but I do want to be very, very clear about the level of difficulty involved in doing that. The other thing that's very important, because there's multiple trees here and there's multiple sets of items, and I basically let the calcs alone just because there's multiple trees and I didn't want you to get all messed up if you went down one path and not the other. Just make sure your tree down here, whatever tree you're on, matches your skills, whatever skill set you're using, lightning, blade, vortex, or Soulrend, and that matches your items, either BV leveling or blade vortex generic, and that way you're getting accurate information. If anything seems really off, you may want to check those three. That's the only downside of me doing a little bit more complicated build this time around, just because, again, I'm guessing the meta, and I want you to have options in case something I do is wrong, because it could happen, right? And knowing that it could happen, I want you to have not only a fallback plan A, but I also want you to have fallback plan B, where you have lots of options so you don't feel like you have to re-roll if you decide to go with a Trickster as a league start. I hope this was informational. If you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to leave those down in the comment section down below, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. And as always, have a wonderful rest of your day, Exiles, and stay sane in raid class.